The code we have so far is under RGS 3.5. And guess what? We have a playable game. We can actually win this game now. With 7, we can pick 6 and 1. There's 4, another 7, 8, and 9. And done. But now the player has no way to play this game again. So when we reach this state, let's put a button here to play this game again. We need a condition here in the left section of the game, and that's a simple condition that should determine if the game is done. And rendering this stars display component should only happen if the game is not done. If the game is done, we should render something else, the play again button. Now you might be tempted to put the computation about whether the game is done or not right here. In fact, it's really easy. The game is done when the available nums.length equal to 0. That's it. That's the condition that we need for when the game is done. And if this condition is true, we need to render the play again UI logic. If this condition is false, we need to render the stars display logic that we had before. So let's assume we're going to have a play again component, and we're going to render this here if the condition is true. The thing is, whenever you have some kind of computation like this, you shouldn't really do it right here within what the function returned. And that's for many reasons, but mostly for readability. And this is actually true for this other computation here, but I'm going to focus on this one. This is a little bit less readable than doing something like game is done. And that's why you should prefer to do these computations in variables before the return statement. So let's do that. Maybe right where we did the candidates are wrong, we can also do game is done. And in here, we put the exact same condition that we've tested. This right here is a much better place to do the computations. In fact, the structure of a React component should always be similar. The first few lines should be any hooks into the state, any hooks into any side effects of this component, and then after that, you do any computations based on the state. This is core application logic, while the return statement here is a description of the UI based on all your states and all your computations out of that state. So I think that distinction is handy. Okay, let's write the logic for this play again component. And that's another thing. When you have conditional UI, it's usually a good idea to put the conditional logic in a component rather than inlining it here, because that would make the top level component less readable. All right, let's do play again. Play again is a component. Put it right here. A component that takes probs, and it could just return a simple div. Give it a class of game done. This is the class that I've prepared for this section. And in here, we can just have a simple button that says play again. And before you worry about how to play again, test that this logic is rendering correctly. Go over a complete game in here and make sure that the play again button is going to show up. Test that, and there you go. Play again is showing up. Okay, how do we play again? You have two important ways to play again. We can simply reset the state. And it's really easy. You can reset the state to the same initial values that you've started with on the very first render of the game. So we could have a function here. Let's call this function reset game. And this is a very simple function that will basically do 3 set state calls. It will set the stars to the initial value, which is this thing in here. It will set the available numbers to the same initial value that we started with, which is a range from 1 to 9. And it will also set the candidate nums to an empty array. And this would reset the game, because now we're back to the initial status of the game. And to use this reset game, we need to pass it to play again. So in here, we can give it any name. I'm going to just name it onClick, right? Separation of responsibilities. This play again button doesn't really need to know what is going on click. It just needs instructions of what to do on click. So on click, this play again button receives it as a props, and on its own on click event, it can just invoke this props that came from the parent. That's it. Let's go ahead and test. We need to play a full game in here. And now when I click play again, the whole game should be reset and I can play again. So this is method 1, and it's usually enough. However, things get complicated when your components have side effects. By side effects, I mean things like subscribing to data or starting timers, which is something we're going to do next. Remember, we're going to have to implement this time limit on the game. So we're going to start a timer. And the timer in a component is basically side effect. So when you reset the game, you need to also reset any side effects, not just the state of the game. So just keep that in mind. Once we implement this timer, you'll see how the timer is actually a side effect. And you'll see how React handles creating and removing side effects. And we'll come back to this reset game function and write it in a better way that also takes into account the side effect of the game. We'll do that in the next video.